Dear listeners, we have started working on our other two channels, Lost Relation Chronicles and Fright Chronicles. Please show your love by subscribing to the channels and help us grow. The links are in the descriptions box. Now let's start today's story. Garrett Mans came slouching into the kitchen of his mother's house late once again for supper. The 19-year-old well-built boy was completely unable to keep to a schedule, and it drove his mother into fits of anger that sometimes threatened to become uncontrollable. Wilma Mans was not an easy woman to live with at any time, and when she was angry, she was totally impossible to get along with. Many years ago, Jerome Mans, Garrett's paternal grandfather, had completely cut his ties with the woman his only son, George, was once married to. He still managed to keep in touch with his grandson, but did not get to spend the time with him he wished he could. In fact, Garrett's tardiness this evening was because of a visit with his grandfather. They had, once again, held a clandestine visit while tromping through the woods along a stream in which they were fishing. As with many fishing and hunting trips, this one consisted of a small amount of actual fishing and a large amount of drinking and telling of lies. As happens many times, the fishermen lost track of time as they depleted the stock of beer in Jerome's cooler. Thankfully to Garrett, Jerome felt he was old enough and mature enough to drink in moderation when under adult supervision, no matter what the damn law said. Of course, this did not endear him to Garrett's mother, but then nothing probably ever would. Garrett's only father figure was his grandfather because his biological father died after he and Wilma divorced almost 16 years ago. If not for economic necessity, his mother would have kept him as far away from his grandfather as she could. Even letting Garrett visit his grandparents galled her, considering their mutual feelings about each other. She allowed the continued contact because she initially needed the free childcare, as well as the occasional cash infusion they provided to her finances. She deeply resented the fact she had to go to work when she divorced her husband. She never admitted it was her cheating with one of the lowlifes. Well, more than one, but she was only caught the one time, wasn't she? From the country club that caused the divorce. She blamed Jerome for supporting Garrett's father in the proceedings and helping him arrange things, so she ended up with almost nothing from the divorce. Never mind that she got her standard 50% of the marital assets, she felt she was cheated. How could she know both cars and the house really belonged to Jerome and his company instead of George? He always referred to them as our house and our cars. Hell, she didn't even receive any alimony because her salary was actually higher than George's. She even blamed Jerome for that. After all, he owned the business they both worked in, didn't he? Wilma managed to convince the court she was the better parent and should have custody of the children, so she did receive a pittance of child support. But Garrett stopped over a year ago when he turned 18. Now, he was just an empty hole into which she was still forced to throw her hard-earned cash. She held the same job for the last 16 years and had received no raises again. In her mind, Jerome's fault. No, it was all that a-hole Jerome's fault. Things went to shit when she got caught cheating. She never let Garrett forget that opinion, either. After all, he was a man as well as a man, so it was partly his fault, too, wasn't it? Before she ever got into high school, the beautiful Wilma was known as a stone cold, calculating 304. George was advised not to marry her by all his friends and his parents, but he was in love with her beauty. Of course, the fact she gave him the best sex he ever had. She managed to hide her personality well enough from him that they were married and had Garrett before he found out he had truly married the 304 his friends told him he was marrying. He took her abuse for almost 4 years before he had enough. Even then, he only filed for divorce after he caught her cheating. If anything, Wilma became even more demanding and shrewish when her husband George began the divorce proceedings. She felt she was due a life of luxury and plenty because she was one of the beautiful people. In her mind, anything she wanted she was entitled to. Just because her husband, the breadwinner of the family, felt otherwise was no reason for her to have to work longer or do without. After all, he promised to endow her with all his worldly goods when they married. Since he reneged on his promise to support her, she decided the family could just step up and provide the living she expected George to provide. Unfortunately for her, Jerome did not choose to do that. Many times, over the past years, Wilma thought she should have known she would be left out in the cold. After all, that was a family trait. Hell, during the Depression, the Mans owned a small bank in town. Garrett's great-grandfather was killed during a robbery attempt, and his great-great-grandfather just closed the bank in sorrow. He was supposedly so broken-hearted from the death of his son that he simply locked the bank after the police were through inside and never opened the doors again. He made arrangements for the deposits to be transferred to another small bank in a nearby town if the customers didn't make other arrangements. Well, actually, what he did was sell the bank, less the building and contents. The successor bank only purchased the depositor accounts and liabilities. The end results were the same, however. He just closed and locked the doors and walked away from the business, leaving the employees out in the cold with no job. In Wilma's mind, however, he just closed the business and walked away just as George did to their marriage. She knew the family had money, yet they refused to step up and provide for her as they should. She took her anger out on Garrett and Jerome every chance she got. Even her parents refused to support her, claiming they just did not have the money to do so. She knew better, but what could she do? At least both sets of grandparents made sure little Garrett and his younger sister Beatrice were taken care of. All she had to spend her meager salary on was herself and a few of the household bills. It had been 15 years now since his father left home, and Garrett hardly remembered him. George Mans did, indeed, leave home after the divorce, but he did not desert his family on purpose. He died in an accident while moving to another state for work. Because of his grandchildren, his grandfather chose not to completely desert Wilma in spite of her personality. He just continued paying child support per the court order as if it came from his son. Garrett knew, if not for his grandfather, he probably would not have any memory of his father, or at least no pleasant memory of him. His mother spent much time trashing both his father and grandfather. She trashed his father for daring to divorce her and then disappearing. She trashed his grandfather for forcing her to work to support herself. She thought she should receive the money from the insurance policies instead of having it placed into trust for the children. Garrett was, truthfully, not the young man he could potentially have been. His intelligence was almost off the charts on the high side, but his motivation to succeed was almost off the charts to the other end of the spectrum. In other words, he was supremely happy to wallow in the muck of mediocrity. Hunting, fishing, and camping were much more important to him than school and work could ever be. Of course, chasing women rated right up there with the other three, as did eating and drinking when he could find someone to obtain the alcoholic beverages for him. He was attending the local junior college and making what was once known as gentleman's C's. He would, in time, move on to a nearby four-year institution for some kind of degree. He readily admitted his attendance at college was to keep his mother and grandparents quiet, as well as to keep him from having to find a full-time job. Garrett did work part-time as a cleanup boy and gopher for a local building contractor to earn most of his spending money. He enjoyed the work he did for them. It didn't take any mental effort and little hard physical effort. He liked the work all right, but had no idea if he wanted to do that kind of work for a career. He even enjoyed being allowed to do some of the simpler work normally done by a carpenter or one of the other building professionals. He was learning a lot from his job and found the work fascinating, especially the remodel jobs. In any event, this evening when Garrett entered the kitchen, a screaming 304, more formally known as his mother, once again confronted him. Just as he once again allowed the door to slam shut, his mother rushed up to confront him as she yelled, "Garrett, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to be home before I got off work, and it's obvious you weren't. None of the jobs I left for you to do have been done. You haven't even begun preparing supper as I told you to do. And just look at you. You're filthy and, if I'm not mistaken, that is water and river mud on your clothes, not dust and mud from some construction site. You snuck off and went fishing again, didn't you? And you smell like a brewery. I suppose you managed to find some beer to guzzle while you were screwing off again. What am I going to do with you? Garrett, if you don't stop this loafing around, no decent woman will ever look seriously at you. No woman worth having is interested in someone who can't give her the finer things in life. Now get upstairs and clean up." Garrett was so used to his mother's attitude that he just mentally shrugged and accepted her diatribe. As he began trudging upstairs, his sister Beatrice, Bitchy B as she was known to most of her peers, came down them. As usual, she took up all the space and pushed Garrett aside as she snarled, "Get the hell out of my way, a hole." In Garrett's opinion, Bitchy B already exceeded his mother's level of bitchiness by several orders of magnitude. Only the very ultra-high class, in their opinion, at school could tolerate her. She and they made existence hell for all the lesser mortals that came into contact with them. She was absolutely gorgeous, knew it, and demanded all lesser mortals bow and scrape at her feet. She was head cheerleader and used that position to help control the lesser mortals as well. Garrett allowed B to brush past him with no comment as he continued on his way up the stairs. Damn, he thought, I have to find some way to get the hell out of here. I am sick to death of the attitude in this house. Maybe if I find a better job, in A-holes would expect me to work twice as hard for just a little more than I make now. Shit, something has to come along. Hope it's soon, though. I don't know how much longer Mom is going to put up with me. She is already making remarks about me contributing more to the household expenses and getting a better job. Damn. Life continued on for several more weeks. Garrett putting up with his mother and sister while he continued to plug along, taking crappy courses at school and living for the weekends when he could take off and hit the woods or streams. He and his grandfather had a couple of great places to fish and camp in the woods along a stream that ran through his grandfather's small farm. Over the July 4th weekend, Garrett and his grandfather once again went camping and fishing. For them, it was the perfect way to celebrate the nation's birth. For Bitchy B, Wilma, and Garrett's now ex-girlfriend, it was not. They all felt Garrett was being unreasonable when he refused to stay in town and serve the three women and their friends at their gala affair around the pool at Wilma's parents' house. When he flat refused to be there to help grandfather Strom fetch, carry, and cook, they all three unloaded on him. His girlfriend Pauline informed him he would either be there at the party for her and his sister, or she would find someone who would take his place. He didn't show, and she did find a replacement. The party fiasco was just another in a long list of what Garrett felt to be slights and disasters caused by unfeeling, selfish women. None of them cared that he and grandfather always spent the 4th together fishing and camping. None of them even thanked him for all the work he did helping prepare for the party beforehand. Hell, he even invited Pauline to go fishing with them, but she refused rather viciously. Garrett was sitting beside the fire in the dusk of the 4th eating fresh-caught fish, fried potatoes and onions, and pork and beans while he and his grandfather talked. He had just completed explaining his current problems with the women in his life and taken a deep swig of beer to wash down his latest bite. Grandfather Jerome leaned back and watched Garrett for a moment, then said, "Garrett, I don't know for sure what to tell you, son. I can tell you some things that might help, but you need to understand some of what I tell you may be flawed advice because of how I feel about your mother. I know I've yelled at you time and time again when I heard you call her and your sister a 304. You need to respect your mother, son. She brought you into this world and cared for you for 19 years now. You have a sister that you owe some family care for as well. Blood is truly thicker than water. Now that I've said all that again, I have to tell you. Your mother is a nasty, selfish 304, and she has taught your sister to be just like her. It's hard for me to be civil to them, and that's a plain fact. Your grandma felt the same way until her death. We just treated them like we would want to be treated and lived our lives the best we could in spite of them. You need to do the same. Now, as for the girlfriends you keep finding and losing, I can maybe help if you really want the help and will listen to me. First off, son, the old saying is true. Beauty is only skin deep. You keep picking beautiful women to date, usually one of your sister's friends or one of the classy bitches from school. Now, don't get me wrong here. Lots of those women are fine, honorable women. Just because they are beautiful doesn't mean you shouldn't date them. You just need to stop dating them because they are beautiful. You need to find a woman who is kind, gentle, honorable, ethical, and who has the same or complementary interests to yours. I don't think you have done that, son. And you need to look for the inner beauty more than the outer beauty. You also need to think about the future too, Garrett. You're brilliant, but your grades don't show it, son. You need to do better in school. You need to settle on your life's work. No woman is going to put up with an irritable son. I know you're still young, and you want to enjoy what remains of your youth, but you are going to be 20 years old soon. When I was 20, I had a wife and child already, and was working full-time while I went to college nights. You have it much easier than I did, and than a lot of people do. You need to choose what to do with your life. That decision will help you find the right woman. Find one who will support your work and chosen lifestyle. Find one who will be happy with the level of income your chosen profession will generate. Keep away from those high-maintenance, selfish girls you've been dating and find one with substance. Maybe you should step back and take a breather, son. Get to know yourself and then find and get to know your woman. I done all that with your grandma, rest her soul, and we had a wonderful life together. We enjoyed the same things. We liked to camp and fish, and we worked together too. I found a wonderful woman, and you can too, son. Garrett wanted to protest some of his grandfather's statements, but when he started to do it, he thought to himself, he is at least partly right. Many of the girls I've dated have been from my sister's group of friends or acquaintances or one of mom's friends' daughters. They have all been from the upper crust in school. All of them have been demanding and wanted only the best when we went out. None of them wanted to do the things I was interested in. Crap, maybe he's right about the rest of it too. After the quick introspection, what Garrett said was, "I'll think about it, Grandpa, but you sure spend a lot of time just messing around not working and you seem to do okay." "Yeah, I do, son, but when I was young I worked. You forget I'm retired now and living off my retirement and investments." "Okay, fine, but I remember when I was younger, and you sure took a lot of time drinking coffee at the cafe and fishing. Why is it okay for you to do that and not me? If I'm happy with that life, shouldn't I be able to live it also? A man always has the right to live his life as he wants to, son, assuming he doesn't do anything illegal or injurious to others. I just want the best for you. After a couple more beers, the two men put the fire out and rolled into their sleeping bags. The next morning they rose and enjoyed a pot of coffee while they watched the fog rise over the river. After breakfast, they grabbed their beer and fished. After the fish quit biting, they swam, rested, and had a little more care of the dog, while they waited on the evening to come so the fish would feed once again. After the long weekend, Garrett returned to his summer job working for the construction company. He didn't date, but spent some time with some of the girls and women that hung around the men he worked with. Many of them were nothing but barflies. Some were either wives, sweethearts of his friends, or their friends. He noticed a distinct difference in how they acted and their wants and needs from those of the girls he hung with before. They were more like one of the guys, but with special equipment. Hell, they were fun. Maybe he had been fishing in the wrong hole. The third week of July, Garrett wandered into the local arcade and found a recruiter from the National Guard holding court, trying to convince the teenagers that hung around there to join. Garrett ignored him and his younger audience and moved to his favorite machine. It featured a soldier moving through a jungle on patrol. The object was to kill the enemy soldiers as they appeared and not hurt unarmed civilians or your own buddies. After Garrett played a couple of games, he noticed he had an audience. He turned and the sergeant said, "You're pretty good at that game, son. Have you ever considered joining the Guard and learning the patrolling skills for real? We can make you a real sweet deal right now. There's a signing bonus for several specialties if you qualify, and you earn money while you train for any number of careers. After your initial training, you come back home and spend the next 6 or 8 years going to meetings 1 weekend a month and do a 2-week summer camp every year besides. You get 4 days pay for the weekend meetings and full pay and allowances for the 2 weeks in the summer." "Yeah? And how much is this easy money? And how long do I have to be gone for this basic training I've heard you talking about?" "Well, son, your pay is based on several things. Everyone enters as a private. Unless they have some civilian education above high school, then they can enter as high as a private first class, PFC, which is an E3. Did you finish high school? And if you did, do you have any college credits now, son?" "Yeah, I have 60 semester hours of college now. I've been going to the local community college and just received an associate's degree in construction technology. I'll have to go to the 4-year college next semester if I want to keep going." "Great. We can probably get you signed up as a PFC then, and you'll make some really good money right off the bat. You could start at about $1,700 a month while you were in basic and advanced training, plus housing and subsistence allowances. While you lived in the barracks and ate at the mess hall, you wouldn't receive the housing and subsistence. If you lived off post, you would get them in addition to your base pay. After you come back home, you will receive about $258 a month for each weekend and $903 for your 2 weeks in the summer. That's pretty good pay for hanging with a bunch of great guys and serving your country." Something about the sales pitch got to Garrett. Or maybe he was just pissed enough at his mother he decided to get away for a while. Whatever caused him to make the decision is unknown, but he said, "You know, I think I'll do it. Gramps and I have talked about the Army before, and he thinks it's a good deal." "Great. I have my papers in the car outside if you want to come with me. We can get started today then. When I have your appointments made for the tests and physical, I'll take you to them. If you pass, we'll get you a report date and you'll be all set. Until you report for basic, you'll join your unit for the monthly meetings, but won't be eligible to deploy if they are called up." Garrett's test, ASFOB, a test to determine his ability to do various jobs in the military, one that helps place him in a military occupational specialty or MOS, went exceedingly well. He was a prime physical specimen, so the physical detected no problems either. After he obtained the results of the physical and ASFOB test, the recruiter was very upbeat. He called Garrett and said, "Garrett, you can almost write your own ticket in the Guard. You have a great score on the test, and I can put you in almost any MOS we have open. I have units that need aircraft mechanics, wheeled vehicle mechanics, supply clerks, even medics. You tell me what you are interested in, and I can probably find you a position." "I just want to be a soldier." "You got any infantry positions open?" "Well, yeah, but you don't want to do that. You can have a great job." "Hey, I need to fill a medic position in one of the infantry battalions. How about that? You could be in an infantry unit and still get some great training. You could even find a job in your civilian life as an EMT pretty easy after you finish the medical course at Fort Sam Houston. You'd probably need a little extra training to work on a civilian ambulance, but it would be easy peasy after finishing the school at Fort Sam." "I don't know. I never really thought about something like that." "Look, try it. If you don't like it, maybe they'll let you change your job to something else. But with a score like yours, this is a no-brainer for you. Hell, it even comes with a small enlistment bonus because they really need medics." "Okay, let's do it. Where do I sign?" Garrett signed the papers and reported to his basic training the last week of August. He was a natural. He had been tromping through the woods since he was a small boy, so could move quietly and knew how to camouflage himself so the wild animals he hunted didn't see him. He could camp and navigate well, and he shot like the legendary Daniel Boone. Perhaps the only problem Garrett had in basic training was that it came too easy for him. He didn't make a lot of friends when he told his fellow trainees, "Man, you guys need to stop your bitching. This is the easiest money I've ever made. Where else can you get paid to tromp around in the woods and shoot rifles and blow things up? Hell, I thought the PT, physical training, was going to be tough at least, but this stuff is a piece of cake." Garrett learned his skills well and graduated, albeit not too high in the standings because of his penchant to slough off every chance he got. He didn't mind the work, but why exert yourself if you don't have to? After basic, he was sent straight to his advanced individual training as a medic. Once again, he passed with no problem academically, but was mired in the middle of the pack score-wise because of his tendency to slough off. He did excel in the field portion of the training and the classroom work. Unfortunately, he was not what is known as a self-starter. Someone always had to tell him what to do and when to do it. After he was given a job, though, he did it to the best of his ability and as rapidly as possible. Of course, he did the job fast so he could, you guessed it, slew off. After the training was completed, Garrett returned home and began his new life as a part-time soldier. He got back in time to enjoy the summer with his grandfather again. He even got his old job back at the construction company. Now, he felt as if he was set. He had a great part-time military job and another great part-time civilian job. He could hunt and fish whenever he wanted almost, and had more money than he ever had before. Life was good. In fact, the old saying, "It don't get no better than this," could have been written for Garrett in his opinion. On a particularly hot Wednesday evening in late August, Garrett staggered into his home after work to be confronted by his mother. She said, "Garrett, your grandfather died this morning. I guess you need to make arrangements for the old a-hole's funeral or something." Garrett walked to the couch and dropped onto it. He stared at his mother in shock, not knowing what to do or say. He felt empty. His chest constricted, and it became hard to breathe. He tried to talk, but couldn't get any words out. Almost as soon as he sat on the couch, his mother began screaming, "Damn it, Garrett, get your filthy butt off my furniture. You know better than to sit on the furniture in your work clothes. Now get upstairs and clean up. Supper will be ready in 10 minutes. We won't wait on you." Garrett felt a surge of anger rise anew to feed the one he felt when his mother told him his grandfather was dead in such a manner. He was also angry because he died that morning, and she didn't even call him at work to tell him. Garrett's face got red, and he almost jumped to his feet. He opened his mouth to berate his mother for her attitude, but she beat him to the punch, once again letting her 304 out. "Don't you get an attitude with me. You know the rules in this house. After you're cleaned up and we eat, you need to call Barker's funeral home to make the arrangements. Why didn't you even call me at work, Mom? You didn't need the distraction. You need that money to help with expenses around here. I'm going to have at least $100 per week from now on in addition to the things you buy just to make ends meet since that old a-hole died. That's what he was giving me for Beatrice, and I'm sure that'll stop now. I'll also probably have to find some way to get more money from his estate or your trust funds." About that time, Beatrice came waltzing into the room. She was dressed to kill, her makeup flawless. Bea looked at her mother and brother and said, "What are you doing in here, Mom? You know I have to get over to Rebecca's. We're going to the show and I can't be late. Isn't supper ready yet?" Garrett knew she didn't care any more for his grandfather than did his mother, but her callous attitude pissed him off. He turned toward Beatrice and said, "Why don't you just shut up? Grandpa's dead, and all you can think about is being late to go out with your friends? You really are a selfish 304, aren't you?" Beatrice turned to fully face Garrett and snarled, "You a hole. What business is it of yours if I go out with my friends or not? Besides, maybe now the selfish old goat's gone, we can get some of his money and live better." Garrett looked at his mother, but she didn't say anything, so he turned back to face Beatrice and said, "You know, you're right. It's none of my business what you do, and I really don't care. I'm out of here." Garrett rushed upstairs, leaving the two women with shocked expressions on their faces. He quickly took a shower, then went into his room. He packed most of his clothes into an old army duffel bag and lugged it downstairs. He sat the bag beside the door and went back upstairs for his computer and some important papers. Just before he went out the door to load his belongings into his truck, he heard his mother and sister laughing in the kitchen as their utensils clanked and scraped on their plates. Garrett took his first load out to his truck and returned for his clothes. As he was leaving the second time, he let the door slam. Before he got into his truck, his mother was at the door glaring at him. She said, "Damn it, Garrett. You know better than to slam the doors. Now get your butt back here and close this door correctly. And where the hell do you think you're going anyway?" Garrett looked at his mother and said, "I don't know where I'm going, but I'm sure not staying here any longer." He climbed into his truck, started it, and drove off while his mother stared after him. Garrett went to the small bar and grill the construction crews frequented. When he walked in, there were several people he worked with or knew from his infrequent visits in the past. Almost all of them offered their condolences for his grandfather's death. Several of them asked why he was there. Garrett said, "I had to get out of the house. I finally had it with Mom and B. They didn't even tell me about Gramps until I got home." Then, in the same sentence, Mom demanded $100 a week for expenses in addition to what I have been giving her. She said now he was gone, he wouldn't be giving her money for B, and I would have to step up. She's already trying to find a way to access some trust funds we own and get money from them. Now, I don't mind helping out. In fact, I have been buying my own clothes and so forth since I got out of high school. I even help with food, but she could have waited at least until after the funeral. Then, on top of that, she said I needed to take care of all the arrangements, and she called him all sorts of names. B was there, and she was just as bad. All she cared about was eating so she and her friends could go out. When I left, they were in the dining room laughing and joking while they ate supper. I just stopped in here for a burger before I go over to the funeral home and take care of things. Kathy Wilson, his supervisor's daughter, came up and hugged him, then said, "Oh, Garrett, I'm so sorry. We all just heard about your grandfather. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Come on over and sit with us while you get your supper." Garrett began to unwind as he ate and listened to his friends talk. Kathy and a couple of the girlfriends sat more or less to the side by themselves, but they did make a comment every so often in the general conversation. Garrett found himself wishing his family was more like these work acquaintances. He couldn't really call them friends yet, but he felt as if some of them, at least, could become friends. After he finished his meal, Garrett pushed his chair back and started to rise. Bill looked up and said, "Hey, were you off to so early, Garrett? You tired of our company already?" "No, Bill. I just have things I have to do before it gets too late. Mom is making me take care of the arrangements for Gramps, and I have to find a place to sleep before it gets too late." Kathy looked up at that and asked, "What do you mean you have to find a place to sleep? I thought you still lived with your mom and sister." "Yeah, well, I guess I sort of burned that bridge when I left this evening. I suppose I'll go over to Gramps and stay there for a while. At least until I find somewhere else or I get kicked out." "Bill, I guess it's okay to miss work the rest of the week, isn't it?" "Hell yeah, don't sweat it. If you need more time, give me a call Sunday night or early Monday, and we'll work something out. Let us know where and when the services are, too, please." They laid Jerome Mans to rest Saturday in the local cemetery beside his wife. To Garrett's surprise, Wilma came. Not surprisingly, though, Beatrice did not. After the service, Wilma cornered Garrett and said, "I called Jerome's attorney Thursday to find out about his estate, and he wouldn't tell me anything about it. Do you know what's going on with it?" "No, I haven't heard anything, and unlike you, I've had more important things to take care of." Garrett turned and walked away. Just before Garrett got into his truck, Wilma yelled, "Hey, Garrett, where are you staying? I really need to know how to find you if I need something." "Oh, yes. I haven't received your payment yet for the last week's food and rent, either. When will you be giving it to me?" Garrett stopped and looked back at Wilma, his whole body cringing as he anticipated her reaction to what he was about to say. "I'm staying in Gramps' house right now. As for the money, I don't intend to send you any. I am not living with you any longer, and I'll need all I make to pay my own living expenses and college tuition." "What? You know I told you I expected another $100 per week now, so I can make ends meet and buy the things Beatrice needs." "I'm sorry, honey, but that is the minimum I can take from you." Garrett just looked at her, then climbed into his trusty old truck and left. He was amazed at her reaction. Monday evening, Wilma met him at Gramps' house when he got home from work. She got out of her car and walked up to his truck. As soon as he opened his door, she said, "I came for the $100 you owe. We really can't wait any longer for it." Before Garrett could say anything, she raised her hand and rushed on, saying, "I know, you're not living with me any longer. No problem. You are still living in my house, though, so the rent on this place is $125 per week, payable in advance. You can pay by the month if you prefer." "Bullshit. I told you I need all I make to get by. You'll have to find someone else to support you. Besides, this isn't your house. We don't know whose it is right now, but as I understand the laws of inheritance, it will never be yours to either rent or sell. It should go to either me or Beatrice or both of us. In either case, you aren't due any rent. What say we let the courts decide?" "Damn it, Garrett. I need more money to live on. It wouldn't hurt you to give us some. If you moved back home, we could make it easily on what we both make. I know you make good money in the guard, and you still work part-time at that construction company. You could spare us some to help out, you know? Nope, sorry, Mom. Not gonna happen. I have the expense of living here, and I still have to pay for my college. That isn't cheap, let me tell you. Or were you going to do the parent thing and pay for the college for me? Garrett closed and locked his truck and stepped around his seething mother. He went into the house and closed the door in her face, making sure it was locked when he did so. On Friday of the following week, Garrett got a phone call from Wilma. She said, "Garrett, you and Beatrice have a letter from Jerome's attorney here. They want you and her to come to a reading of the will next Wednesday at 10 a.m. in their offices. I haven't received my letter yet. I hope I get it soon because your letter and Beatrice's didn't tell me squat about the estate or distribution." "You mean you opened my letter and read it?" "Well, yes. Why wouldn't I? I'm your mother and have to take care of your business for you." "Well, maybe because it was addressed to me and you're not supposed to open other people's mail? I'll be over after work to get it." "Well, I don't have it any longer. I hired an attorney to represent us so we don't get screwed. I gave the letters to him." That pissed Garrett off, and he jumped into his truck for a quick trip to the local post office. He rented a post office box for himself and put in a change of address so Wilma couldn't open his mail any longer. Garrett arrived at the attorney's office on the appointed date and time for the reading of the will. Wilma and Beatrice were both already there with the attorney they hired. Wilma glared at him when he entered and Beatrice ignored him as she usually did. Exactly on time, they were called back to the conference room for the reading of the will. The first thing the attorney did was verify identities. Then he opened a folder filled with papers. He said, "This meeting is to make provisions for the distribution of the estate of Jerome Mans, deceased. All legal debts are to be paid from the balance of the estate before the remainder is distributed to the survivors as directed by him in his will. After the final bills are paid and any and all valid debts paid, the estate will be distributed as directed by the will." Before his death, Jerome did execute some transfer on death deeds that affect some of his property. Beatrice Mans will receive the house and 20 acres immediately surrounding it per the enclosed survey. He handed Wilma and Garrett a folder. Garrett Mans will receive the remainder of the farmland and the property located at 3 Main Street, Stella, Missouri, formerly known as the Bank of Stella, as well as any and all contents of that building. Any remaining cash in bank accounts and all investments remaining, other than those also transferred on death, after paying all bills, will be divided equally between Beatrice and Garrett Mans. The real property does not have to go through probate because Mr. Mans executed a transfer on death deed some years ago to directly transfer the property to his designated inheritors. The bank accounts and personal property do have to be probated. However, the value of those items is minimal. The attorney looked up at each of the three in attendance and asked, "Are there any questions?" Wilma, who was red in the face, said, "Yes, there is. I didn't hear anything in that will about me. What do I get?" "Nothing at all, I'm afraid, ma'am. You are of no blood relation to Mr. Mans, and he did not elect to provide for you in his will, therefore, you receive nothing from his estate. As you heard, the entire estate goes to your daughter and son. The house and land your daughter inherited is to be held in trust for her until such time as she is legally an adult. This office is her trustee." "That's preposterous. He can't do that. I won't allow it." "I'm afraid he can, and he did, ma'am. It is your legal right to contest the will, but I warn you it will stand. And by contesting, you will merely reduce the amount your children receive because of added legal and court costs. Is that really what you want for them?" "No. We need all we can get to live." "Wait, you say the house belongs to Beatrice? What about rent? Can she rent it? And if so, will you pay the rent money to us so we can live on it?" "Yes, I suppose that could be arranged. But since it would be her money, we would have to ensure it was used solely for her benefit." "Well, fine. Garrett has been living in the house now since his grandfather died. He has refused to pay me any rent on the place. I demand you take $125 per week from his inheritance and pay it to me for rent on the place." The attorney looked shocked. He turned toward Garrett and said, "Is that so, Garrett? Did you move into the house and agree to the rent?" "I did move into the house the night Grandpa died. I never agreed to any kind of rent. Mom demanded $100 a week for me to live at home. I was already buying most of the food and paying my own expenses, so I believed that was asking too much. She and B were such greedy bitches I decided to leave. Since the house was empty and I had nowhere else to go, I moved in there." "I'm sorry, son, but you didn't really have the authority to do that. Your mother is right. Since the house is technically your sister's, you either need to vacate the premises or pay rent. I will do some research to determine fair market value and let you know how much to pay." "That's bullshit. I can't afford to pay that amount of rent, living expenses, and college expenses on what I earn." "Wait, you say the old bank is mine now? The hell with this. I'll just move into it. If I remember correctly, Grandpa said there were apartments upstairs at one time. I'll just move into one of the empty apartments on the second floor. Will that work? I won't have to pay rent on that, will I? The attorney smiled and said, yes, I believe it will work, and no, you won't have to pay rent to yourself. Wilma screeched, well, what about the money he owes for back rent? We really need more money. And how do you expect us to live if he doesn't pay? I can't live on my salary alone. I will arrive at fair market rental value and deduct that amount from his inheritance and pay it to your daughter, Mrs. Mans. As to how you will find the money to live, I can't say. I was under the impression you were employed full-time. Well, yes, I am, but I can't live on that. I only make about $48,000 a year, you know. I'm sorry you are having trouble living on that salary, but I find it hard to fathom. You make more than most of the working people in this area, and they get by okay. You should be living quite well on that. The attorney pushed back from the table slightly and said, well, unless there are further questions, that seems to cover the day's topics. Everyone stood and began to walk out of the room. Wilma and Beatrice were the first ones out. The attorney said, Garrett, would you please remain for a few more minutes? I have some other business I need to discuss with you. After his mother and sister were gone, the attorney motioned to the door and his assistant closed and locked it. He then turned back to Garrett and said, I'm sure you realize the items we discussed here today were far fewer than what your grandfather owned. I'm surprised your mother didn't catch that and ask where the other property went. I need to tell you that before he died, he transferred all of his business holdings to his long-term employees by creating a transfer on death deed. What this means is the business and associated property never entered into his estate, nor did the property given to you and your sister. I'm also surprised your mother and sister didn't mention the business during our discussion, especially since your mother works there. The attorney reached into his folder and pulled a letter from it. He looked at the envelope for a moment, then handed the letter to Garrett. He said, your grandfather left this letter for you. I will take a few minutes to allow you to read it. Then if you have any questions, we can discuss them before I move on to another matter. Garrett opened the letter and read it. It said in part, Garrett, you have been a great pleasure to me. I know it sounds silly, but I love you very much. I have left you the means to make a good living for yourself if you apply yourself to the labor necessary to do so. Perhaps your only failing is your laid-back attitude. I had hoped your enlistment in the Guard would change that. The military tends to make men out of boys. I was so proud when you enlisted. Unfortunately, you only work enough to get by. If that is your goal in life, so be it. If not, it's time to apply yourself, boy. If you apply yourself, there is no limit to where you can go with your intelligence. You can stick around here like I did later in life and take short tours with the Guard and still make a comfortable living, or you can apply yourself and excel. I hope and pray you apply yourself and excel. You have the ability to do so. I know your mother and sister are spoiled rotten, and I'm sorry you'll have to put up with them. I can legally cut your mother out of my will, but I couldn't your sister. I had a moral obligation to leave her something, so I gave her the house and a small acreage. She can live well there if she will stop her uncontrolled spending. It will be a nice place for her and a future husband. I rather suspect she and your mother will sell the place and spend the money. In any event, I have done my duty to her. As for your inheritance, I hope you keep the land and enjoy it, either by farming it as I once did or just by fishing and camping on the old place as you and I did the last several years. I also left you the old bank building and lot on which it sits. As you know, I haven't been in the old bank since it was closed. I really don't remember exactly what is still inside the building. I do know there are some stock certificates there that are now yours. That is where I got a large portion of my income. It really doesn't matter what else is in the bank, however, because everything there is now yours. I never returned to the bank after Dad died. I did send one of the maintenance men over regularly to check the roof for leaks and to make sure the building was still in good repair. We had to remove the external stairs to the apartments to safeguard them, but when that was done, they were in tolerable shape for a building as old as the bank is. We also took down the external stair landing and the side and front deck at the same time to keep kids from climbing up on it to access the apartments. As far as I know, the building is structurally sound. Again, I don't know what you will do with it, but it is yours to use or sell. I am sure some of the old furniture will bring a good price if you want to sell it. Remember this old man with love and fondness, dwelling on the good times if you will. I will do the same for you. Goodbye, son. After he read the letter, Garrett sat back in his chair and looked at the attorney. When he saw Garrett lean back, he said, Your grandfather left me some money on retainer, Garrett. He expects your mother to try and contest the will. In the event she does not, I am to retain the funds to use to provide you legal services until such time as they are exhausted or I retire, at which time I am to release the balance remaining to you. Your grandfather placed the property and stock accounts as TOD, but there isn't much left in the brokerage. Soon you and your sister will receive confirmation of the ownership transfer to the property you will receive as TOD. I have already provided his death certificate to the institutions that require it and began the transfers for you and your sister. The only items that have to go through probate are the few personal items and bank accounts. You may take possession of your building and land at any time. Now, I need to get to my next appointment. If you have questions or need more help, just call me. Please, Garrett. See Stacy for your keys to the bank on your way out. That afternoon, Garrett went to his grandfather's old house and packed his few belongings. He went to the old bank and looked around with the intention of moving into one of the apartments. When he entered the building, he sneezed from the smell of the long, closed-up building. To his surprise, all the desks and teller cages still had papers, calendars, and writing implements on them. It was as if someone left the day before and expected to return to work again the next day. Unfortunately, there was no stairway to the upper floors from the inside. He went outside and saw a door in the side of the building on the second and third floor, but no way to reach them. He remembered years ago his grandfather hired a firm to take the outside stairs down because kids were breaking into the apartments and playing on the stairs. He would have to either live in the bank itself or build stairs to reach the apartments. At least the concrete bases for the stairs and balcony supports were still present. Oh well, for now he would make do with the bank itself. His first order of business was to get power and water into the building once again. From his inspection, he knew he would have to rewire the building because the wires were the old style with cloth insulation and were nowhere near safe to use. There had never been city water in the building, so he had that to take care of also. When the bank closed, it actually used its own well. He was sure it was now dry or the pipes and her pump didn't work. Besides, city water was available, so why rework the well? The next morning, Garrett rose early. He usually slept late every chance he got, but the hard floor of the bank wasn't conducive to lying around and dozing. He quickly dressed and headed for the door, intending on finding something to eat, perhaps at the next door cafe. He was still drowsy and consequently didn't pay attention when he wandered out the front door of the bank onto the sidewalk. He stepped out right in front of Kathy Wilson and her father as they, too, headed toward the cafe. He caught sight of them from the corner of his eye and stumbled, almost falling as he tried to avoid crashing into them. Kathy reached out and grabbed him to keep him from falling. She said, "Garrett, where did you come from? You appeared almost out of thin air, as if you came out of the old bank." "Well, yeah, I did. Gramps left the bank to me when he died. Since I don't have anywhere to stay, I spent the night there. I suppose that'll be my new home for a spell. Bitchy B and Mom more or less kicked me out of Gramps' house yesterday. She inherited it and wanted my whole paycheck from the construction company, almost, for rent, so I came here." "Wow. Well, come on with Dad and me. We're headed to the cafe for breakfast." "Yeah, me too. I don't know what I'm gonna do about food and water. There's no power or water in the old bank, and I have to rewire and plumb it before there will be. No power means I have to eat out or do the sandwich thing, as I can't afford to do anything else." Bill looked up when he heard Garrett say that. He said, "No power or water. You can't live like that. Let's go look at the old place after we eat. Maybe we can do something about that for you." After the meal, the three headed over to the bank. When she entered the door, Kathy stopped and looked around. "Wow," she whispered. "This is really neat. It sure doesn't look like the banks today." Kathy walked around and picked up several items, looked at them, and put them back down. When she got back to Garrett and her father, she said, "Garrett, a lot of this stuff is really, really old. I bet you could sell it for a ton of money and use that to install your water and power. What else is here?" "I don't know. What you see is all I've seen. The vault is locked, and I don't know the combination for it. I haven't looked in any of the drawers or desks either. I have no idea what is here. While you and Daddy look around to see what needs to be done, can I go through some of the desks?" "Yeah, sure." After Bill and Garrett did a quick survey of the bank, Bill said, "The old building seems to be in pretty good shape structurally, but we'll have to tear out all the wiring and plumbing. It's all shot to hell. Are you sure you want to live here?" "Well, maybe not here, but in this building. The two upper floors are supposed to have apartments in them, but Gramps had to have the stairs taken down years ago to keep the kids out of the apartments and to keep them from climbing on them and maybe getting hurt. I was hoping to live upstairs in one of the apartments." Bill walked out of the building, saying as he went, "Well, let's get the ladder off my truck and see what is up there. I know we can at least check out the second floor, and I think we may be able to get to the third one." After they placed the ladder, Bill looked up at the boarded-up doors and windows. He put on his tool belt and climbed the ladder carrying a small pry bar. He looked over the plywood covering on the door, then inserted the pry bar under the edge of it. He carefully worked around the wood, prying it loose as he went. When he had the bottom and part of the sides loose, he stepped down the ladder a short distance and pulled the wood over his head, then climbed up the ladder under it. He braced himself and finished prying the wood off, letting it fall to the ground below. Bill tried the doorknob and cursed. He looked down at Garrett and said, "The damn door is locked. I don't suppose you have the keys for it, do you?" I'm not sure. I got a lot of old keys when the attorney gave me the bank keys. Let me go inside and get them." Garrett trotted around the corner and into the bank. The doors into the upstairs of the old building were on the side, overlooking the parking lot. He quickly came back with a large bunch of keys on an old metal ring. He looked up at Bill and said, "Here, catch," before he tossed them up. Bill caught the keys on the second throw and turned back to the door. He tried almost all the keys before he found one that unlocked the door. There was a dangerous appearing dance as he tried to get the door opened because it opened out. Finally, he got it opened and carefully climbed the rest of the way up, then disappeared inside. Garrett immediately climbed up the ladder and followed Bill inside the second story. When Garrett got inside the building, he saw they were in a small entryway. There were two doors opening off the entry, one at the front, one at the back. Bill had the rear door opened and was working on finding the keys to the front unit. As Garrett walked up beside him, the latch clicked and Bill said, "Finally, why is it always the last key you try that works?" "Well, no matter. The doors are unlocked." Bill gestured toward the door and said, "After you," and motioned Garrett into the front apartment. The two friends stepped into a dark, dingy room. They could hardly see anything because the windows were boarded up. Garrett walked over to one of the side windows and tried to open it. Finally, with Bill's help and careful use of the pry bar, the window opened and they applied the pry bar to the covering plywood. Finally, with a screech, it gave way and fell to the ground. The light showed a partly furnished room containing a couch, an old-fashioned chair, and lamp. They walked back into another room that was the kitchen and saw an old-fashioned stove and what appeared to be a gas-operated refrigerator. There was an old wooden dinette table and 4 old wooden chairs. A small bathroom opened off the kitchen with a door into a small bedroom. There was even an old 3/4 bed and chest of drawers in the room with a nearly useless mirror over it. "Well, on the surface, this isn't too bad," Bill said. "Let's see what the other room looks like." The two friends moved across the small entryway and entered the second apartment. Garrett and Bill once again opened a couple of windows and pried the wood off them to get some light in the room. After the room had some light coming in the windows, they found it was a mirror image of the other apartment. Garrett looked around and said, "I think I can live here okay with just a little work. We need to get some wiring and water up here, but I can live with the old-fashioned decorations for a while. I'll have to build some stairs, though. I sure don't want to climb a ladder every time I want to come home." Bill stood looking around for a short time, then said, "Yeah, this wouldn't be too bad if it was cleaned up and brought up to code. At least we're lucky here in this town, and they don't have zoning regulations or city building codes. We only have to worry about the national and state requirements. I think we can help you with things if you want us to. We can get some of the materials we need from waste if you're not too picky about things like that. It will still cost quite a lot to put in a safe set of stairs, though." "Yeah, I had already thought about raiding the trash bins on the jobs for some of the things I might need here. We're always throwing away things that are still usable. I'll still have to buy the plumbing and wiring, though. I sure don't want to screw around with building stairs and a deck for the upper floor, either. I wonder if we can make an inside stairway off the entry?" Bill walked back into the apartments and looked around. He said, "It looks as if the 2 bedroom closets are directly behind the entry here. Assuming the upstairs is the same, we can run the stairs across the building and eliminate one of the closets on each floor. That's not a problem for the second floor anyway. I think I'll turn the whole floor into one apartment for me. I'll make the front into living area and put a bedroom and family room or office in the rear. Hell, I might even just make 3 bedrooms back there. I think there's room. We can leave the upstairs as a 2 apartment floor and maybe I can rent them for some extra income." "Well, Garrett, I think that would work, but it'll be pretty costly even using trash and secondhand things from the job sites. I'll help you, but I won't cut corners or compromise on safety. Again, we're lucky this town doesn't have any zoning regulations or building inspectors to worry about." "Yes, but I still want it done right if we do it. And thanks for the offer of the help, but I really can't afford to hire anyone. I do think I want to make a larger deck outside, though, to sit on. Maybe even run it around the front to look over Main Street like before. Who said anything about money here? You're a friend, and if I want to spend some of my free time helping you, I will. As for the deck, maybe we can do that. It depends on how much work it will be to install anchors and bracing to hold it. Remember, it'll cost." I think you need to do all you can to preserve the original wood and fixtures too. Before we do much, you need to check with the government. If you can get the building on the Register of Historic Buildings, there are grants and help available for the remodeling. I think there is even some tax breaks. Of course, if you do list the building, you will have to preserve the historic facade at the very least. That may impact putting a balcony on the front. If you get the building on the register, you have to leave the exterior as nearly like it was originally as possible. Great. I like the way the building looks, and I like the idea of tax breaks and grants even more. I don't know anything about the process of applying for the benefits though. Do you? Some, but Doris in the office is the go-to person for that. She can help you. Let's get you some wiring into the bank for now, and see about getting you hooked up to city water. Then you'll have a place to stay while we do the rest of the work. It'll be slow going, working part-time evenings. I won't work every evening or weekend, either. I don't expect you to. I'll be able to do most of the work myself. Anyway, I'll definitely need help on the heavy work and getting the stairs and deck framed correctly. If it isn't too expensive, I think I want the deck frame made out of steel. They walked into the bank to find Kathy sitting at a desk reading some old magazines. She looked up and said, "Garrett, I found all kinds of really neat stuff. Look at some of these pictures. I think this one is the building at the grand opening. There's an article with it that must have been cut out from the newspaper at the time. The building looks just as it did back then except for the missing stairs and landing. There even used to be a balcony on the front of the second story." "Did you say balcony? Let me see that picture, please," Garrett said with a bit of excitement. "I thought I remembered Gramps saying there used to be a balcony overlooking Main Street." Garrett took the article and pictures from Kathy. He gave them a quick perusal, then said, "Look at this, Bill. There used to be a balcony just like I was describing when the building was erected. Will that help us?" "It sure will, Garrett. There must have been anchors in the front at some time. Let's go look a bit closer and see if we missed something," Bill replied. "You'll have to keep the width the same as before, but at least you can have the front balcony you wanted. It looks as if it is only as wide as the sidewalk. I would guess maybe 8 feet at the most." There was no balcony on the third floor, but there was a nice roof protecting the second floor balcony and sidewalk. For the times, this was really an elaborate facade. Kathy waited impatiently as the two men talked about the balcony. She didn't see what the big deal was, and her curiosity about the contents of the drawers and vault was paramount to her at the moment. She soon interrupted them, saying, "Garrett, I still want to see what's in some of the desks and the vault. Some of the teller's drawers are locked too. Do you have the keys for them? How about the vault? It's locked too. Can you open it? It would be really cool to be inside a real bank vault." Garrett tossed her the keys and said, "Here are all the keys I have. Knock yourself out. I have a bunch of papers the lawyer gave me. They're over there on the large desk. If the vault combination isn't in them, I have no idea where it could be." Kathy grabbed the keys from Garrett and took off for the locked drawers and side rooms. As she grabbed the keys, she said, "Cool. Thanks." Garrett and Bill looked at each other and grinned, then shook their heads. Bill and Garrett headed outside to examine the front of the building closer. As they looked it over, Bill said, "Look, Garrett, there are some slightly discolored spots along the blocks. I wonder if they grouted in the mounting anchors after the balcony was removed. It sure looks like that might be the case. If that's so, it could make installing a balcony much easier, to say nothing of cheaper. It will also be a plus to do this when you apply for historic status. Now, you aren't changing the building, you're returning it to its original design." The two men continued to talk about the work and cost involved in restoring and remodeling the building. Garrett agreed to hire his employer's firm to install the framework for the stairs, landing, and balcony as it needed to be done correctly to ensure the safety of those who might use the balcony as well as those who might be walking under it. Back inside, Bill and Garrett stood looking at the decor for a moment, and Bill asked, "Have you given any thought about what you're going to do with this floor? That solid walnut wainscoting and trim will be absolutely beautiful if you can keep it and work it into whatever you intend to do with the bank. This area would make some great office space for a small business." "No, I haven't even thought about uses for the building other than living upstairs. I hadn't even considered renovating the apartments I don't use for rentals until you mentioned it. I'm not sure I want to bother with rentals after listening to you guys talk about all the problems you have with damage and late payments. I sure could use the money though, so I might. Well, if you figure out some way to screen your renters, it helps. The damn laws are written more to protect the deadbeat renters than landlords, and you have to be careful how you handle the apartments or you get into trouble there, but it can be done. Kathy and her mother do my rentals, and they seem to have it down pat. We still have some late payments, but at least most of our damage is normal wear and tear. I haven't had to evict anyone for over a year. If you go that route, maybe you can get some pointers from them, or better yet, no more apartments than you have. Maybe they will manage them for you." "Well, that's pretty far in the future. I have to get things back up to snuff first. So, what do you suggest for rewiring this mess? Hell, I don't know if water or electricity should be first. Water? I think so I can at least clean up and take a crap. Yeah, I think you're right. Look, I don't have much going on today. I can go home and get some pipe and tools if you want to take a stab at plumbing. You can begin tearing out the old plumbing while I'm gone. We can get some of the work done inside here. Anyway, then next week you can call the city for a meter and hook into the mains. The exterior walls of the old bank were constructed out of 12-inch limestone blocks, so a big percentage of the plumbing and wiring were inside the room instead of in the walls. This wasn't so great for aesthetics, but it made it much easier for Garrett to pull the old wiring and plumbing out. He carefully saved all the old pipe and wire for later recycling. The copper wire would bring a good price and would help with expenses. After he tore out all the pipes and wires he could reach, he built wooden runs for the utilities when he replaced them, so they weren't out in the open again. Where possible, he ran the utilities up inside an interior wall. By the end of the day Sunday, they had all the plumbing done for the downstairs toilet in the bank and for his one bathroom and kitchen in his upstairs apartment. Much of the plumbing was temporary because Garrett intended to remodel the bathrooms later and install more modern fixtures. He intended to leave the sinks and commode in the same location, however, so there wouldn't be much repeat plumbing. They even had some temporary wiring ran to give him some light and power for an air conditioning unit and to cook with. Now all he had to do was contact the electric company and city to get service started. The next project would be the building of the stairs, so he could enter his apartments easier than climbing the ladder. That took almost a month working with the contractor and cost more than Garrett even wanted to mention. He made sure the job was done to his satisfaction, though he did help keep the costs down by locating used steel for the frame. He even managed to cover the deck so it looked as much like the picture Kathy had found as possible. Now he had a nice place to sit outside and watch the world go by if he ever found the time to do it. Much to his surprise, through the summer from time to time one or another of the men he worked with would come over and help with some of the heavier work or with a job Garrett didn't know how to accomplish. Even nicer, none of them would let him pay them for their help. He always made sure they had plenty to eat and drink. Occasionally, he even had a barbecue out by the stream on his farm for his co-workers. They went through the entire building's plumbing and wiring, so by the time fall came, all the work remaining was cosmetic finish work. He even bit the bullet and redid the bathrooms and added new fixtures so they could hide the plumbing in them. It took almost 2 weeks to build the interior stairway from the second to third floor, but after it was completed it was much easier to get to the 2 upper apartments. Somewhat to his surprise, Garrett was more than able to afford the work he was doing to the building. Much of that was because of Kathy. She had the bright idea to list the things they found in the bank on eBay. It was amazing what the antiques brought. People were crazy for the old office equipment, calendars, and papers she found to sell for him. She even took care of the shipping and handling, only keeping the excess shipping and handling fees for her efforts. So far, they had been unable to get into the locked vault. Garrett was too busy to worry much about it, but Kathy was going crazy wondering what was inside. She had grudgingly agreed with Garrett that they had more important things to take care of, but she still kept asking when he was going to get it open. Finally, late in November, Garrett had the 2 third-floor apartments completed and ready to rent. The old bank was 30 by 72 feet, making the floor space on each floor 2,160 feet square. The common use entryway and internal stairs reduced the area in the 2 apartments to about 1,000 square feet each to rent. Since they were in a small town, he asked $475 per month for each. To his surprise, the apartments rented within 2 weeks of being advertised. That gave him $900 per month income to live on or use for improvements to his apartment or the bank on the first floor. Kathy and her mother agreed to act as his agent for $25 per apartment per month. None of the utilities were included in the rent, so the balance of the rental flowed to Garrett's bottom line, except for a small amount spent on insurance and property taxes. Garrett finally gave up trying to find the combination to the safe and called a vault company to see if they could open it. On the day the representative came, it seemed like half his friends were there for the grand opening. Kathy was right behind the technician, bouncing around in impatience. Finally, after nearly 30 minutes of working, the technician turned the handle on the vault. With a loud click, the tumblers disengaged, and he slowly pulled the door open. While he continued to service the old vault, Kathy darted inside the thick walls and began to explore. Bill and some of his closest friends followed. There was a large bank of safe deposit boxes just inside the vault door. Some of them were locked, some stood open. Farther inside was a thick steel lattice that was locked closed. Kathy pulled against it and let out a moan when she also found it to be locked. She turned and darted past the men and over to the desk she had been using. She grabbed the keys and trotted back into the vault where she began trying keys until she found one that unlocked the folding lattice. She pushed the door open and moved quickly into the space. She stopped inside and looked at the shelves. She was just standing staring at the shelves when Bill and Garrett moved up beside her. There were several trays on the shelf filled with money of all denominations from pennies up through real silver dollars. Farther along were stacks of the various denomination bills. There were 1s, 2s, 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, and 100s. Although the larger the denomination, the smaller the stack of bills. Kathy turned to Garrett and said, "Just look at the money. I bet there's thousands of dollars there. You can finish college and the work on the bank now with no problems." Bill stepped past Kathy and looked at the money. He picked up some of the bills and coins, then whistled before he returned them to their original location. He turned to Garrett and said, "Kathy is more correct than I think even she knows, Garrett. This money is worth far more as collector's items than its face value. Those coins are real silver, and some of the bills are gold and silver certificates. I didn't see one Federal Reserve note in the lot. When the country went off the gold standard, all the old gold and silver certificates were supposed to be turned in for destruction. You have a veritable gold mine right there on that shelf. You need to be damn sure this vault stays locked, and don't even breathe a hint of what is in here, or you will have serious problems." Bill turned and began to usher Kathy out of the vault after he admonished her to be quiet about what they found. As they were passing through the safe deposit box room, she stopped once again and said, "I wonder if there's anything in those locked boxes?" Garrett turned from locking the lattice gate and said, "I don't know, Kathy. I saw the board back in the vault with the keys for the boxes on it. We can look in them later." As he started to walk past her, he stopped and picked up a book lying on a small desk. He read the cover title, then opened the book, leafing through several pages before he spoke again. "This is the book on the safe deposit boxes. It looks as if the locked boxes are assigned either to my family or the bank itself. The policy was if a box was empty, it was stored in an open condition, so there is probably something in the boxes that are locked." After they were out of the vault, the technician came up to Garrett and said, "I've finished doing the maintenance on the vault. I can give you the combination now, or, if you want, we can reset it to something else." "That's fine. Let's leave it as it is. Can you leave me instructions on resetting it later if I want to?" "Certainly, sir. If you'll come with me, I'll show you what you need to know, and I'll get out of your way." After a 20-minute discussion and tutorial, the technician closed and locked the door, then watched as Garrett unlocked and relocked it. He then left for his next call, and Garrett walked back into the main part of the bank. There were several people milling around, and they raised an uproar when he appeared. The self-important a-hole that served as mayor of the small town moved in front of Garrett and demanded, "Well, what did you find? We all want to know what's in the vault. You did get it open, didn't you? I don't know why we couldn't have been inside to see." "Yeah, we got it opened. All we found was some old bank property and papers. I haven't had time to look over the contents, but there doesn't appear to be much of any interest. The safe deposit boxes are mostly locked, and we haven't gotten into them yet, but from a book I found, it seems the locked boxes contained bank papers. All the records in existence show that everyone's personal papers and funds were transferred to other banks when great-grandpa locked the doors and sold the deposits." "Well, what were the papers you found?" "I'm chairman of the City Historical Society, and I need to know, so we can document the find in our city history books. I need to know some of what is there for the reporter when he gets here." Garrett stared at the little man and clenched his jaws in anger before he said, "You know all I'm going to tell you now. What is there or not there is none of your business. This is private property, and the contents of the vault are my property and my business, no one else's." "We'll see about that. What is in that vault is part of the history of this town, and you have an obligation to keep my office as mayor and chairman of the Historical Society informed. Now get out of my way and let me inside." The mayor tried to push Garrett aside as he also turned to one of his cronies and motioned her forward. Garrett stepped back slightly from the shove the mayor gave him, then set his feet and stood in front of the blustering man. Garrett, while young, was larger than the mayor and in much better shape. This time when the mayor pushed against him and tried to go around him, he bounced off Garrett. He once again blustered, "Step aside, young man, or suffer the consequences." Garrett once again blocked the mayor's access to the doorway into the back of the bank while he said, "Kathy, call the sheriff's office and request assistance, please. The small town did not have local law enforcement but relied on the county sheriff. Tell them I am having trouble with forced entry and someone is about to get hurt." When he heard Kathy talking to the dispatcher, the mayor finally gave up his attempts to push past Garrett. As he was leaving the building, he blustered once again and said, "You haven't heard the last of this, young man. You can either give me access to the information you found in that vault voluntarily, or I will force you to give it up. It's your decision." Apparently, there was a sheriff's vehicle close by because a deputy arrived within about 10 minutes. He came into the bank and asked what the problem was. Garrett spoke to him and explained the difficulty. Since the mayor had left, there was nothing the deputy could do about the problem. However, he agreed to find the mayor and explained to him that, unless he could prove either the city or he personally had documents or funds in the vault, that he had no legal right to access it. After the excitement died down, Garrett also called his attorney and discussed the problem with him. He was told there was nothing that could be done until or unless the mayor tried something illegal to access the bank, such as breaking and entering or other strong-arm tactics. At the end of the month, when the rest of his bills came in, Garrett did not receive a bill from the town for water and sewer fees. He paid all his end-of-month bills that he received and never even noticed he didn't receive the city bill. The first time he knew he didn't receive the bill was when he found a letter informing him his service had been terminated for non-payment taped to his door. Sure enough, when he tried to get some water, there was none. Garrett checked with his tenants, and they both said they received their bills and had already paid them. They both still had water service. He went to the city offices and was told the bills had been mailed, and he failed to pay his, so the disconnect was proper. The city clerk, who was also the mayor's wife, smirked and said, "Now, if you will pay your bill with late fee and the reconnect charge, we can have you hooked back up in a couple of days. That will be $21.64 for the water, $10 for the late fee, and $75 to reconnect your service." What? That's bullshit. I told you I didn't receive the bill. I don't mind paying the late fee, but the reconnect fee is totally wrong. I got the disconnect notice, so if you mailed me the bill, I should have received it also. Well, I'm sorry. Now, do you want to reconnect or not? Yes. Let me write you a check. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Since you are delinquent and your bills, our policy is to accept cash only. I'm afraid I can't accept your check. You're kidding. You take checks from other people. Well, yes, but they are in good standing. If you get current with your bills and cooperate with the city, I'm sure you can soon begin paying by check like more dependable people do. What do you mean, cooperate with the city? This is the first time we've had any problems, and you're treating me like a criminal. Well, now you know how it feels, don't you? If you get with the program and become, shall we say, more open and cooperative, perhaps these little problems could just, shall we say, go away? All at once, Garrett had a flash of insight. This was all the mayor's doing. He glared at the clerk, turned, and walked out the door, letting it slam closed as he did so. When he got back to his house, he called his attorney. Unfortunately, he found he had no recourse but to pay the amounts demanded. The attorney said, if they have a policy of cutting off service for non-payment of bills, and most utilities do, they have acted correctly, assuming the policy was made known to you at some time. Most utilities have a statement on the application for service discussing penalties for non-payment or late payment of bills. You should find your contract and check, but I'm sure it will have the requisite clause in it somewhere. I suggest, from now on, you mark your calendar and go to the city office before the bill becomes delinquent to make your payment until this blows over. On the other hand, if you can prove they are harassing you and didn't send the bill, you might be able to get the reconnect fee rescinded. The next day, mid-morning, a sheriff's patrol car came to the job site where Garrett was working. The deputy asked for and was directed to Garrett. When he got to him, he verified his identity and then said, "You have been accused of making terroristic threats to the Stella city clerk in her office yesterday, Mr. Mans. Fortunately for you, they have no proof of your activity and no witnesses, so we can't incarcerate you. I need to inform you, however, that this threat report is in our files, and if you are again accused of these actions, you may be incarcerated at that time. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, I do, but you know as well as I do that this is all hogwash. Did you get the details of the problem I'm having with the mayor, or did you just take his and his wife's word on this?" "What do you mean? We have a complaint that you entered the city office and angrily demanded they restore utility service to your building after they had to disconnect your service because of non-payment of your bill. You allegedly made several threats, then stormed from the building and damaged the door when you slammed it. You then got into your truck and spun the tires when you left, throwing rocks and gravel with the tires into the building, thus damaging the paint thereon. The city is in the process of preparing a bill for damages because of that." Garrett began laughing when the deputy told him about the damage caused by his vehicle. The deputy looked at him angrily and said, "I assure you, this is no laughing matter, Mr. Mans. You could have injured someone when you did that." Finally, Garrett managed to get control of his laughter and said, "I'm sorry, deputy, but I find it extremely funny and highly improbable that I spun my tires on leaving, since I only live less than a block from the city offices and my truck has been in the garage for the last week. You can check with the Mason Ford dealership to verify all this if you wish. You can ask anyone in town, well, anyone except the mayor and his cronies. and they will verify I have been walking or riding a bicycle for the last several days while my truck is being repaired. I strongly suspect all this is a result of my refusal to let the mayor into my building to go through my personal papers and the vault in the old Bank of Stella. He told me, in front of witnesses, that I would suffer the consequences of refusing him access. In fact, we called your department because of his attempts to force entry into the building. When he heard about the prior problem with the mayor and the truck, the deputy looked thoughtful before he said, "If what you say is correct, there may be a problem with the mayor filing a false report. I need to take your statement, and we will have a detective do some investigation into this matter. I strongly advise you to keep your distance from the mayor, city employees, and the office until we get this straightened out." After the deputy left, Garrett called his attorney and reported the conversation. The attorney, Mr. Douglas, said, "I think you should do as the deputy suggested and keep your distance. When you have to be around the city office and employees, I suggest you carry and use a tape recorder so they can't falsely accuse you of something again. In fact, it might be a good idea to have a witness with you. And, above all, be sure to get written receipts for any funds you give them in cash." That evening on the way home from his job, Garrett had Bill, who was driving him to and from the job until his truck was repaired, stop at a local electronics store so he could pick up a tape recorder that would fit in his pocket. It was a good thing he did, because when Garrett began to walk up the stairs to his apartment, the mayor confronted him. The mayor stepped in front of Garrett and snarled, "Are you ready to cooperate with me now, young man? Or do you need more convincing?" Of course, when he saw the mayor, Garrett turned on the tape recorder and adopted as non-confrontational a stance as he could, then said, "What do you mean, Mr. Mayor? What am I supposed to be cooperating about, and why are you here, on private property, accosting me? You know damn well why. I told you if you didn't let me have access to the documents you found in the bank, you would suffer the consequences. I've just started with you, and look what it's cost you. Over $100 in 1 month, just to have water in your building. If you continue stonewalling me, you'll end up in jail and broke. All it will take is a couple of bruises and some broken windows, and you'll be up on assault charges at the very least. Now, when can I get into the bank? How about the 12th of never? I told you once the papers in the vault were family documents and business-related documents, and you had no right to see them. My statement stands. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." "Okay, a-hole. You let me know when you are willing to cooperate. Everything that happens to you is on your shoulders. I've warned you." The mayor stomped off angrily, and Garrett climbed wearily up his stairs to his home. After he sat and ate his supper, he began thinking about what the mayor said. He decided to wander around town and see if he could come up with something that would help. He called a couple of his friends and told them about the latest confrontation. The next morning when he got to the job site, Garrett heard one of his friends call to him, "Hey, Garrett, come over here a minute. I have something to show you." When Garrett got to where his friend was sitting, he showed him a short video clip he took on his phone that morning. He said, "I was driving past the back door into the city office. You know, I live just down the block, and saw the mayor and the meter reader talking behind the offices. The mayor sort of held his head up, and the meter reader hit him twice on the cheek. I got a shot of the second hit when the mayor fell down and into the door. He broke the glass in the door, and it looked like he was cut some. I guess you're not the only one the mayor has pissed off now." Garrett laughed and said, "Good. Now maybe he'll leave me alone." About an hour later, the same deputy that talked to Garrett before drove up and approached him. This time he took out his cuffs and said, "Garrett Mans, you are under arrest for assault and battery, as well as damage to public property. Now, please turn around and hold your hands behind your back so I can cuff you, sir." After he was cuffed, Garrett said, "What the hell is this all about? I never touched anyone or destroyed any property. Is this about the discussion I had with the city clerk a few days ago? I thought we had that taken care of. I don't know anything about a discussion with the city clerk. You are being arrested today because, this morning about 7:30 a.m., you allegedly had a confrontation with Mayor Parker and attacked him behind the city offices." He swore out a complaint. "Now, you have the right to remain silent." As the deputy was leaving, Garrett yelled at his friend, "Hey Darren, please send that picture to my phone and to Mr. Oliver Douglas Iskew, my attorney. I have a feeling I'm going to need it." When Garrett and the deputy arrived at the county seat to process him into custody, his attorney, Mr. Douglas, was there. After the necessary paperwork, Garrett was allowed a conference with Mr. Douglas. The attorney said, "Well, it looks like this thing is just going to get worse and worse. Did you have a fight this morning with the mayor? Is there anything to this accusation?" "No, this is total bullshit, a complete fabrication. When I got home last night, the mayor was waiting for me and again tried to force me to let him into the vault. I am really beginning to wonder why he is so adamant he needs to see the contents of the vault. What is his real motive? It just can't be because he thinks there is something of interest to the historical society inside. That doesn't make any sense to me. Hell, if he had asked nicely, we would have let him, and the society see some of the historical documents and calendars and so forth. After I again refused to let him in, I ordered him off the property. As he was leaving, he told me to let him know when I was willing to cooperate, and that everything that happens was on my shoulders. I'm sure glad I recorded the conversation like you said to do. You got it on tape? Great. Where is the recording? Crap, I guess the sheriff has it. I had the recorder with me today when they arrested me. I even taped some of the conversation with the deputy. Well, I suppose I got almost everything today because it was running when he cuffed me. Oh, when they called you from my job site, did they mention the pictures Darren took this morning behind the city hall? I wonder if that a-hole. Yeah, that's it, I bet. What? Darren told me when he came by the city hall this morning on his way to work, he saw the meter reader and mayor talking in the alley. Then the meter reader hit the mayor a couple of times and knocked him into the door. The glass broke, and it looked as if the mayor got cut. I bet the a-hole was hurt this morning, and instead of telling the truth that the meter reader did it, he blamed me. Darren was supposed to tell you about the video and send it to you. Surely that will clear me. Mr. Douglas smiled like the shark he was when he heard that. He stood and said, I think I have enough for now. I need to get your recording before it disappears or is damaged or erased. And I need to find that witness of the altercation this morning. You can bail out probably after the preliminary hearing, but if this goes like I expect, they will release you. I wouldn't be surprised if your good mayor doesn't end up in jail in your place. The preliminary hearing will probably be tomorrow, Thursday at the latest. The rest of the day and the entire night felt weeks long to Garrett. He sat alternating between fear that he would end up staying in jail for some time and anger at the damn mayor for doing this to him. He just, for the life of himself, couldn't understand why this was happening. Sure, he refused to let the mayor into the vault to go through the papers it contained. But why was he so damn angry and vindictive about that? If he had asked nicely and been willing to wait for a couple of days until Garrett had a chance to look some of the documents over, he would have let him see them. After all, he did have a valid reason for asking to see them. It was entirely possible some of the documents would add to the knowledge of the town's history. Garrett just refused to allow him unrestricted access, especially before he knew what, exactly, was there. The next morning, Garrett was shuttled over to the courthouse for his preliminary hearing. He was embarrassed to be seen shuffling along in his bright orange jumpsuit, shackles on his legs and handcuffs on his wrists. There were 3 other prisoners with him, and they made quite a spectacle as they shuffled from the transport van into the courthouse for their hearings. Garrett's case was the first one held, for which he was thankful. When he was led into the courtroom, it seemed as if everyone he knew was there. Bill, Kathy, Darren, and a couple other people he worked with were sitting watching him as he shuffled, clanked, and rattled down the aisle to his seat. The mayor was also there, and when he saw Garrett, he grinned widely and winked at him. There were a couple of nasty-looking bruises on his face, and his arm and the back of his head had bandages, probably from the cuts he received when he fell into the door and broke the glass. After a few uncomfortable minutes sitting in the noisy courtroom, Garrett saw the bailiff stand and heard him say, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Judy McFarland." After the judge entered the courtroom and took her seat, she invited everyone else to be seated. After everyone was seated, she banged her gavel and called the session to order. She then called for the first case. When she received it, she read the charges against Garrett and explained this was the preliminary hearing to see if there was enough evidence to bind him over for trial on the alleged offenses. The prosecutor stood and presented his case first, explaining to the judge and court how dangerous and unreasonable Garrett was. He said he had witnesses and evidence that would prove Garrett did assault the mayor of Stella on the day in question and had a history of threatening behavior. He told the court of Garrett's alleged threats on the day he tried to get his water turned back on, and even described the alleged damage to the city hall from rocks and gravel thrown onto the building when Garrett allegedly drove off in anger on that day. After the prosecution presented his case, Mr. Douglas stood and began refuting the points made by the prosecution. He said, "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Garrett Mans, pleads not guilty to these charges. I have evidence that will prove my client, in fact, committed none of these offenses. If it pleases the court, allow me to refute these charges in chronological order. First, the alleged threats made in the city hall to the city clerk. There is no evidence or witnesses to these threats. It is my client's word against that of the wife of the mayor, who also serves as city clerk. Secondly, on the date he alleged spun his tires and threw rocks and gravel onto the city hall, he was walking. His vehicle was in the garage being repaired and had been there for a week. I have here proof of this that I would like to introduce as defense exhibit number 1. Second, my client was nowhere near the city hall on the morning of Tuesday. last at the time he allegedly assaulted the mayor and knocked him into the door, breaking the glass. I have witnesses that state he was with his supervisor on the way to a job site for work. His truck was still in the garage, and he was riding back and forth with fellow workers to get to the job sites. Mr. Douglas stood and said, "I have here a video taken on the morning in question, Your Honor, showing not Mr. Mans assaulting the mayor, but Clarence Jordan, the city meter reader, hitting the mayor in the face and knocking him into the door. I do not know why the mayor chose to blame my client for this injury, but it is obvious he did not commit the alleged crime." The observers in the courtroom broke out into murmurs as they discussed the bombshell just delivered. The judge rapped her gavel on its pad 3 times and said, "Quiet, be quiet, or I will clear the room." When he heard Mr. Douglas eviscerate his case against Garrett, the prosecutor looked sick. At the same time, Mayor Parker stood and rushed through the gate, separating the audience from the attorneys and participants in the hearing. He rushed at Garrett and shouted, "You a hole! I will not let you get away with shitting on me like your family did my great-grandfather. I know you have evidence in that bank that will clear his name. Your family stole his farm, and then got him sent to prison for bank robbery and murder. I know you can clear his name, and then you'll have to return our farm to us." When the mayor approached Garrett, he tried to strike him. Garrett raised his still shackled wrists and blocked the blow, then watched as 2 bailiffs apprehended Mayor Parker. After they had him subdued, the judge said, "Arrest that man for contempt of court, assault, and perjury. After I review the evidence and statements from this case, I might find other charges to bring against him." The judge turned to look at Garrett and Mr. Douglas, then banged her gavel. She said, "I find no probable cause to hold Mr. Mans for trial on these charges. Case dismissed." It was afternoon before Garrett was processed out of the jail and allowed to return to his home. He was exhausted both mentally and physically from his ordeal. At least now some of the mayor's actions made some sense. Well, not really, but he at least knew what caused the animosity and drove the mayor. If he ever knew the name of the bank robber who attempted to rob the bank and shot his great-great-grandfather, he had forgotten it. By the time Garrett returned home, his friends had heard the news of his release. Some of them were waiting on him to arrive at his house, and they let out a cheer when he exited the county vehicle that returned him to his doorstep. An impromptu party broke out in the shade of his building. Somewhat to his surprise, he found himself unwinding and relaxing as some of the fear and anger drained from his body, as it filled with beer and snacks ordered as takeout from the cafe 2 doors down. Just before 3 p.m., the garage called and told Garrett his truck was ready to come home. He and Kathy drove the 20 miles to town and picked it up, even though they were probably over the legal limit of blood alcohol content to do so. When they arrived back at his house, the small parking lot was packed with people partying on. Some of them hadn't even realized Garrett was gone. Garrett never knew what time he managed to stagger, or more nearly crawl, up the stairs to his apartment and fall into his bed. He remembered telling some of the people he worked with that he was going to take the remainder of the week off before he returned to his work. Strangely enough, he was coming to enjoy more and more. He found he really liked working with his hands and watching buildings take shape from his labors. He even enjoyed the more onerous tasks involved in remodeling and restoring some of the older homes they were hired to work on. He was especially proud of his work restoring the apartments in his old bank. His own apartment was much larger than those he restored for rentals. The rental units had been restored and upgraded into very nice units, much nicer than the majority of rentals in the small town in which he lived. Now it was time to begin upgrading his own apartment, but he couldn't decide exactly what he wanted to do to it. Early the morning after his release from jail, Garrett staggered from his bed. Well, not so early actually. It was nearly noon, and made himself a pot of coffee. He sat on his covered balcony overlooking the main street of his hometown while he drank the bracing elixir. He decided to pack up his old Ranger FX4 and disappear to his camping spots along the stream running through his farm. He needed the solitude and calming influence of his little plot of ground before returning to his daily grind. After his coffee pot was drained, Garrett packed up the food he thought he needed for his 3-day stay and loaded everything in his truck. He normally kept his fishing gear and weapons in the truck, so he was ready to go. Now, as normal, he wished there was a store in town where he could add to his food supplies and buy some alcohol, but there wasn't. He made a slight detour to pick up those items he wanted but didn't have at home, then hurried to his camp. When he got to his favorite camp spot, Garrett didn't tarry. He set out to erect his tent made from a couple of plastic tarps, then laid his fire for later. He grabbed a beer and his chair, then sat listening to the sounds he loved so. He watched the stream flow past, and an occasional fish break the surface of the water in the deep pool beside which he camped. In the distance, there was the sound of an old square baler and tractor as one of the neighbors baled a small field of alfalfa hay. Occasionally a cow would low or a rooster crow. Garrett felt the tension flow out of his tense body as the peace embraced him, and he soaked up the calming country sounds. As dusk was falling, Garrett rose and pulled his fishing pole from his truck. He searched around until he caught a few grasshoppers and a couple of grub worms, then headed to the river to catch his supper and breakfast. The fish seemed to bite the worms better than the grasshoppers. Within 30 minutes he caught 2 nice crappie and called it a day. One of the fish he left on a stringer for the morning. The other he quickly cleaned and took back to his camp for supper. Before the next hour was up, Garrett had prepared his supper of fried crappie, fried potatoes and onions, and a small can of pork and beans, eaten it, and cleaned up after himself. He laid out his sleeping bag and relaxed on it with his hands under his head as he listened to the evening sounds. There were all types of chirps, croaks, and other sounds as the wildlife wandered around. He especially liked to listen to the splash of jumping fish and the spring peepers as night fell to cloak the land in relaxing darkness and silence, not known in the cities or even in the small town in which he lived. Garrett woke with the sun the next morning and quickly prepared his coffee. While the coffee perked, he stripped and went into the super cool water for a relaxing swim to wash the grungy feeling of dried sweat off his body from the heat of the previous night. Garrett didn't bother dressing after his swim. He poured his first cup of coffee and sat beside the stream drinking it. He relaxed while watched the fog rise from the water and glow whitely in the just rising sun. Birds flitted from place to place, and an occasional fish splashed in the slowly flowing water. By the time the sun was completely up, Garrett drank his coffee pot dry and was ready to prepare his breakfast. He fried several slices of bacon, an egg, and more potatoes and onions for the first meal of the day, deciding to keep the fish for later. After breakfast was completed and the dishes washed, Garrett pulled on a pair of old ratty shorts, picked up his fishing gear, and wandered down to the stream. Instead of fishing in the pool beside his camp, he unlocked the chain holding his old John boat to a tree and pulled it into the water. He moved back to a small 4x8 building, unlocked it, and took a 2-horsepower outboard motor and a gallon gasket from it. After attaching the motor to the boat, he returned to the shed for padding for the seat on the boat and 2 oars for emergency use. He picked up his cooler filled with sandwich material and drinks for the day on his last trip to the boat. Garrett started the motor and headed upstream at a slow pace. He relaxed back into the seat as the quietness of the river soothed him. Even the quiet operation of the boat motor wasn't that bothersome to him. He slowly made his way upstream past beautiful old trees and the occasional cow or calf. He was in shade almost the entire way because of the huge tree canopies hanging over the stream. Finally, almost 2 miles upstream from his starting point, Garrett stopped the engine and let the boat coast to a stop at the head of a long, deep spot in the stream. As the silence of the morning enveloped him, Garrett allowed the boat to find its own way back downstream as the slow current took charge. Instead of immediately beginning to fish, he reached into his cooler and picked up his first beer of the day. He opened the can and leaned back in his seat after taking his first large sip. He stretched out his legs and relaxed as the banks of the stream slowly flowed past, and he slowly enjoyed his beer. In moments, the boat gently grounded in the shallow water near the bank underneath a century-plus old oak tree. Garrett let the boat rest there until he finished his beer, then efficiently prepared his fishing rod for the first cast of the day. As he tired of fishing in one spot, Garrett would use the oars to move his boat back into the current and let it drift slowly along. As the boat drifted, he continued to fish until the boat once again grounded, at which time he would either push off again or sit and fish for a while. From time to time, he would stop fishing and either have another beer or a sandwich and chips. He lost track of time completely. In fact, he hadn't even bothered to bring a watch with him on the trip, much less on the excursion. It was late mid-afternoon before Garrett slowly floated into sight of his campsite. He had a stringer of his limit of crappie, so decided to call it a day. He grounded his boat on the gravel bar beside his camp and began carrying his belongings up to the tent before he quit for the day. When Garrett made his first trip up the bank, he saw a familiar figure sitting in his chair drinking a beer. About the time he saw the figure, Kathy rose from the chair and said, "Damn you, Garrett. You worried me. Why didn't you tell me you were coming out here today? When you didn't answer your phone, I got worried you got too drunk last night and fell off your balcony or something. I drove all the way to your place to check on you, and you weren't there. I decided to come on out here to see if you were here and to check on you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Kath. Sure felt like crap yesterday morning, though. I didn't even get up until almost noon yesterday. What time did the party end, anyway?" "Don't know for sure. I woke up in my truck about 4:30 and everyone was gone, so I drove on home. I haven't gotten that ripped in a couple of years." "Yeah, me too. Sure glad the law didn't come nosing around. Who the hell brought all the beer and snacks anyway?" I know a couple of the guys there weren't 21 yet, and we all could have been in trouble over that. Sure glad the mayor wasn't around to call the law on us. Oh yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to tell you. I heard on the radio this morning the mayor was taken from the jail to the hospital. He mouthed off to one of the other inmates and got the bejesus beat out of him. Garrett laughed and said, well, at least this time they can't blame me. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. He hurt bad. They didn't say, just that he was taken to the hospital after a fight at the jail. A bunch of reporters were nosing around town just before I left this morning looking for you, and bothering everyone wanting to know what we thought about it. I just blew them off after I said I had no idea where you were. While the two were talking, Kathy helped Garrett carry his things back to the storage unit and secure his boat to the tree well above the floodline once again. They then began cleaning the fish to prepare them for frying. Garrett washed his hands after the fish were dressed and grabbed a beer. He tossed it to Kathy and took one out for himself, then sat in his chair to watch the stream flow past once again. Kathy pulled another chair up beside him and helped. As the friends drank their beer, they talked. After a few general comments, Kathy looked over at Garrett and asked, so, what now? You have a place to live, so what are your plans from here on out? Are you ever going to finish the work on your apartment? And what about the bank? What are you going to do on the first floor? You really need to do something about the old money and things in the vault. Those old bills and coins are really valuable, I bet. We still need to check out everything in the safe deposit boxes, too. Yeah, I know. I'm going to upgrade my apartment next, but I don't have the money to do that right now, and I want to do it right. I want a really nice place, but a comfortable one. I guess I'll see if I can find someone who knows about the old money and see if a collector wants it or something. Garrett, I'm sure a collector will want it. It's just a matter of finding out how you can unload it and get the best price for it. I think you need to call some auction houses in a large town that handle things like that, and maybe some of the larger dealers to see what they think is the best way to sell the money. Yeah, I suppose you're right. I guess I'll go back early Sunday and begin looking into the boxes. Then one day next week, I'll see if I can find someone to tell me about the bills and coins. Can I help with the boxes, Garrett? I'd really like to see what's in them. And maybe while you're working, I could call around and do some research on the net to see if I can find someone to help you with the money. I don't care if you come when I open the boxes. And it would really help me if you would find someone to give us information about the money. Great. Now, how about I make us some supper before we get so drunk we can't do it? Kathy and Garrett had a very enjoyable supper once again. She refused to let him help cook or clean up, so he sat and visited with her while she did the work. Of course, as they talked, they continued to drink, and they drank with their meal. After the meal, Kathy was staggering somewhat, as was Garrett. They were at the stage where everything was funny and giggled at the most ridiculous things. Kathy almost fell when she tried to sit in her chair beside Garrett. She regained her balance and looked around, then said, I don't think I can drive home right now, Garrett. Do you mind if I crash here? Nah, but I don't have anything for you to sleep on except a part of my sleeping bag. It's warm enough, I never use it to cover up and sleep in my clothes. Kathy giggled and said, I don't care. Just don't be telling anyone you've been sleeping with me. Deal. Garrett stood and drained his last can of beer, then staggered into the darkness. Garrett was already laying on the edge of the bed when she returned to the firelight. Kathy crawled onto the bed and lay down. Night, Garrett, she said. Yeah, good night, he returned. They both dropped off into alcohol-induced slumber almost immediately. Garrett rose once during the night to relieve himself again. When he returned to the camp, he threw a couple sticks of wood onto the coals to keep them live. Kathy's shirt had rode up during her sleep, and he could dimly see her body in the slight firelight and moonlight. He stared for a moment, thinking how beautiful she was. Hell, he admitted to himself, Kathy was just plain beautiful, period. Even better, her beauty was inside as well as outside. The next morning, Garrett woke to find himself snuggled up against Kathy. When he realized what he was doing, Garrett carefully tried to remove his hand and slid backward away from Kathy. As he was trying to rise from the bed, carefully Kathy rolled onto her back and looked up at him with a smile. She said, Where are you going so carefully and quietly? You're almost sneaking off like someone doing something wrong. Well, I didn't want to wake you. I thought I'd make some coffee, and then when you were ready to get up, it would be ready. Yeah, I bet. You don't look so guilty because you were feeling me? Look, Kath, I didn't mean to do it. I just woke up, and we were together. I'm sorry. To his eternal surprise, Kathy laughed and said, Look, it's no problem. I'm the one who climbed into your bed. You aren't the first man who copped a feel, and you are a damn sight better than some who have tried. Now, quit looking so guilty and let's do something. When Kathy saw his shock at her answer, she sat up and said, Garrett, not all women are like your mother and sister. Don't get me wrong here. None of us like inappropriate contact or unwelcome attention, but we both know you were asleep when you snuggled. You were asleep, weren't you? Yes. I would never take advantage of you, Kathy. Kathy smiled and rose from the bed. As she walked toward the woods to take care of her morning business, she said, "Why don't you get the coffee on while I commune with Mother Nature? Then maybe we can find something better to talk about." Garrett watched in silent admiration as Kathy almost glided across the clearing and into the trees. After they drank the coffee, they had a light breakfast, cleaned up. Then in the already hot day, Garrett walked into the stream up to his neck and relaxed. Kathy watched him for a moment, then pulled her shorts off and followed, wearing only her shirt and panties. Garrett stared at her in shock as she waded out to him and looked into his eyes. "What?" she asked. "Am I not allowed to cool off too?" "Well, yeah, but you don't have on a swimsuit." "So? Do you?" "Hell, no. I trust you to be a gentleman, Garrett. Now can we just drop the subject, and can we leave before much longer? I would really like to mess around in the vault some before it gets too late." "Yeah, I guess." After they floated around in the water for a few more minutes, Garrett regretfully headed for the stream bank. He dried off somewhat, then carried his damp towel, the only one he had, back to the bank where he left it for Kathy. He stood watching her for a moment, but left when she said, "Garrett, you've seen all I care for you to see. Would you please just go back to camp until I can get out?" Garrett regretfully returned to the camp and began loading the things he was going to take home. He heard Kathy come out of the water and was not able to restrain himself. He turned to look at her. Unfortunately, she had already used the towel to wrap around herself, hiding the good stuff. She was carrying her shorts in her free hand. Ah, Kathy said as she shook her finger at him. "You just keep on working there." Kathy walked over to the tent and picked up her lightweight long-sleeve shirt, then disappeared behind the storage building. Sooner than he expected, Kathy returned with the shirt tied and wearing her dry shorts. The two friends finished packing up and Kathy followed Garrett as they drove back to town and stopped at his house. They spent a few minutes carrying things upstairs and putting them away, then grabbed a tall glass of iced tea before they went downstairs and into the bank. Kathy waited impatiently as Garrett opened the vault and rapidly followed him inside. She was almost bouncing in excitement as he opened the steel lattice folding door. He walked over to the key rack and pulled the keys down for the first locked box, along with the bank's key for the second keyhole in each box. Garrett moved to the bank of safe deposit boxes and inserted the keys into the proper holes in the first box he was going to open. He felt movement, then pressure on his left side as Kathy moved in close to him, so she could watch as he unlocked the door and pulled the box from its slot in the bank vault. "Well, open it," she exclaimed. Garrett sighed and juggled the box around until he was able to lift the lid and look inside. Kathy stuck her head between his and the box to see what was there. The box contained a pile of papers, but they could not tell what they were without removing them. Finally, Garrett gently pushed her away and said, "Come on, Kathy, stop crowding me. Let's take this box into the main part of the bank and sit down at a table to go through it." After they were seated, Garrett took the papers out of the box and let Kathy grab them from his hand. She laid them on the table and picked up the top paper. She opened it and began to read. Garrett took the second paper on the file and did the same thing. They alternated picking up and reading papers until the entire pile had been reviewed. Kathy slumped in her chair dejectedly and said, "Well, that wasn't very exciting. All it was a bunch of old ledger pages. Why do you suppose they kept them in there? I thought it would be something pretty good. It might not be good now, but they were important in their time. If you notice, they are ledger sheets for loans people had with the bank. They show the amount borrowed and each payment made. They probably had to keep the old records for a while in case someone needed them. All the pages I saw showed the loan had been repaid in full, so I suspect they are historical records. You notice each showed the payment due date, the date the payment was made, and late fees if any were assessed. There was a column for the principal, one for the interest, and one for the remaining balance. Did you see any on some of the old businesses that used to be here in town? I saw one for the old feed store where they financed an addition to the building, and another where they financed purchases of grain one year using the grain as collateral. I bet the Historical Society would love to have some of those items. Come on, Garrett, let's get another one and see what's in it." "No, wait, Kath. Let's do this methodically. I want to find some paper and make an inventory list of what's in each box in case I ever want to find something. Didn't you say some of those books in the vault had information on the contents of the boxes?" "Yeah, sorta. One of the books showed who rented the boxes and had their signature on the page each time they opened the box. I suspect they were the forerunners of current-day signature cards. Some of the others listed the bank as user of the box, but didn't have clear inventory lists there. I noticed there are different signatures on the bank sheets depending on who opened the box, I suspect. I want to make a more detailed list of everything before we go off half-cocked. The list for the box we opened only showed a code and number. Hey wait, let me look. Yeah, look here. The code is PDLN 1936 for this box. All those loans were paid off, and it looks like they were all dated 1936. I bet that means paid loans, year 1936. Okay, that makes sense. I think I will list the name of the person or business that had a paid loan in here, though. Kathy grabbed the book from the table when Garrett put it down and turned to another page. She said, "Look here, Garrett. Box 19 has a code, BDS 36 to 45, and Box 17 has a code, STKCRTs, but no numbers. Let's look at them now." Oh, come on, Kathy. Let's be methodical here. Let's go in chronological order, so my entries will be in order too. Oh, okay, but hurry. The two friends went back to the keyboard and replaced the key for Box 1. Garrett picked up the key for Box 2, and they returned to the table to go through it. They spent the rest of the afternoon opening and inventorying the boxes reserved for the bank's use. Many of the boxes contained operating records. Surprisingly, 2 of the boxes contained gold. One had coins in it, the other small bars of gold and a few of silver. Finally, they got a Box 17. When they opened it, the code made sense. It contained several fancy printed stock certificates. A few of the certificates they recognized as belonging to companies still in operation. There was one certificate for the Union Pacific Railroad, 300 shares. Another certificate was for Ford Motor Company, 200 shares, and one for John Deere for 200 shares. There were many certificates issued by companies that neither of the friends recognized. One certificate, in particular, was interesting. It was for 100 shares of the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, issued in 1911. Garrett and Kathy made a list of each company and the number of shares, then replaced the certificates and moved on to the next box. To their disappointment, Box 18 was empty as had been a few others shown as reserved for bank use. Box 19 was opened and found to be full of a now very rare duck. It was filled full of bearer bonds, a bond that was payable to whoever presented it and or the coupon for payment. No record was kept of the owner of record. Once again, they recorded the company name, face value, issue, and maturity date of the bonds and locked up the box once again. Finally, the last box that was still locked had been opened and inventoried. The two friends replaced the last key, left the books and inventory sheets on the bookshelf in the vault, and closed and locked it. They left the bank, locked its door, and returned to Garrett's apartment where they got a glass of iced tea each and went onto his balcony to watch evening fall over the small town. They waved to the occasional car that drove by, sometimes shouting to a friend. About 8:30 p.m. Kathy stood and said, "Well, I suppose I had better head home, Garrett. Thank you for letting me stay at your camp Friday and Saturday, and even more for letting me help you look through the vault. I had a lot of fun. When are you going to check on the stock and bonds to see what they're worth? Garrett, you might be really rich here. What if some of those companies besides Ford, Deere, and the railroads are still in operation? I'm so excited for you. What are you going to do with all the money you have in there?" "I don't know what to think right now, Kathy. I need to talk to Mr. Douglas, and we need to find out what things are worth before I think much about this. I just hope Mom doesn't get into a worse snit than she's already in if she hears about this." The next day, each went to their work. After she got caught up at her job, Kathy did some research on some of what they found in the bank and made some effort to find someone knowledgeable about coins and old currency. Garrett made a phone call at noon to Mr. Douglas so they could discuss his finds. Douglas was not available, so Garrett asked him to call him back in the evening if possible. Mr. Douglas called Garrett about 9 p.m. that evening. When he found out what Garrett wanted to discuss, he became excited and worried at the same time. He said, "You mean to tell me that vault has contained all that money and those certificates for all this time?" "Yes. As far as I know, it hasn't been opened since great-grandpa locked it and closed the bank down. It certainly hasn't been opened in the last several years." "That's just amazing. Well, I really need to know several things. You said that Grandpa left me the bank building and all its contents, but you also said the bank accounts had to be probated and the brokerage accounts had been set up for TOD. What does all that mean for the stocks and bonds we found in the vault, assuming they are still worth something? And how about the cash? Is that considered a bank account since it was in the bank, or is it mine because it was in my bank vault and was the contents of the bank? You said the bank and its contents were transferred to me by a TOD deed." Well, as I see it, you own everything in the bank, cash, stocks, and bonds outright because they were contained in the bank as contents when you accepted ownership. We'll need to document the fact the stocks were in the bank and then get them changed into your name. The bearer bonds are no problem, of course. I think we need to get a hard value on everything, including an appraisal on the currency and coins, as well as the bullion as soon as possible. I can't stress enough how important it is not to let anyone know what is in that old vault. If word ever got out, there is a real possibility you could have a break-in and lose it. I'm sure that old vault is not nearly as secure as are the more modern ones. A good safecracker could get in it rather quickly. I think it would be a good idea to get the high-value items and bearer bonds out of the vault and into custody of a broker as soon as possible. I'll begin research tomorrow to find people who can properly value the contents of the vault and help you safeguard it better. The rest of the week went by more normally than had the 2 or 3 previous weeks. Garrett went to work, then came home and did some minor work on his apartment. He even began cleaning out some trash and junk from the bank, sorting it to see if any of it was of value. He was going to trash a lot of it until Kathy jumped his shit. She said it was all old stuff, and there was probably some fool out there that would pay good money for it. She took charge of the junk, as Garrett called it, and began trying to sell it as she had some of the earlier contents of the bank. He talked to Kathy once about her research for a dealer on the coins. Tuesday of the following week, Garrett received a phone call from Mr. Douglas. After the normal pleasantries, Mr. Douglas said, "Garrett, I've made several calls during the last week and my assistants have made more. We found 3 brokers and 1 auction house interested in the currency, coins, and bullion in your vault. I have also found a stockbroker that is willing to do the research on your stock and bond certificates to determine their value. The stockbroker will do the research free if you agree to open an account with him and deposit all the valuable certificates in it." Great. I'm more than willing to do that. What about the money and bullion? How do we handle that? Well, that's a little more complicated. The auction house and 2 of the dealers will agree to send someone to your vault to appraise the items. The other dealer insists you bring the items to them for appraisal. I recommend we first do the on-site appraisals. Then if we can't decide on one of those appraisals, we can make arrangements to ship the items to the 3rd appraiser. The bullion will need to be shipped to someone who deals in it if the appraisers don't want to handle it. Sounds good to me. When will we do that? You can more or less set your own time. You will have to be present at the appraisal, and I recommend you have a witness or 2 as well. I can send one of my staff if you would like. In fact, I strongly suggest you allow me to do so. We should make copies of the certificates before you send them to the stockbroker, and we should get pictures of the coins and currency, as well as written receipts on all the items in the vault as they are shipped to the various dealers and/or auction houses. Okay, we can do it your way. I can get off work pretty much any day if you give me a few days warning. Do you want to set up the appointments, or should I? Also, will all the appraisers be there at the same time? I can take care of setting the appointments for you. I don't think it would be a good idea for all the businesses to be there at the same time. I suggest we let one look at the items one week, then the others on following weeks if possible. Okay, do it, Mr. Douglas. 2 weeks after that conversation, the first appraiser arrived. They got to the bank about 8:30 on a Wednesday morning, and after a few very short pleasantries asked if they could get started. There was a 3-person team consisting of the head appraiser, a clerk, and a photographer. Garrett and Elizabeth Prevost, Mr. Douglas's paralegal, were there too. About 10 a.m. Kathy showed up. When the appraiser first entered the vault and saw the stacks of currency and coins, he stopped and stared. He licked his lips and turned to his photographer and said, "Get a shot of the racks before we begin work. Then be sure to get good. Clear shots of every bill and coin as we work, obverse and reverse." The appraiser turned to Garrett and said, "I'm afraid we might not get done with this today. There is quite a lot more here than I anticipated. Do you have internet access here by any chance? Also, should we work here, or may we take the items out into the main part of the building? We can work wherever you think it would be best. I do have Wi-Fi if you need to get online." The team got to work immediately, with Elizabeth observing their work and Garrett and Kathy running errands and carrying items from the vault and back as they worked on them. About noon, Garrett offered to run down to the cafe and bring back lunch, or they could lock up and walk down for a more leisurely one. The team lead opted to have Garrett bring them lunch. As it was, they did not complete their work until nearly 11 p.m. As they were leaving, the appraiser said, "We should have the official appraisal completed by the end of next week, sir. We will mail you a copy and a tender offer if you wish us to purchase the collection. We will also make an offer to serve as your agent if you wish to do a sale piecemeal through our firm." The following Tuesday, the auction house arrived and followed much the same procedure as did the coin dealer for their appraisal. They also were to mail their estimate of the value and offer to auction the collection at some future date. The third set of appraisers came the week following the auction house. When they saw the amount of currency and coin, they refused to appraise it on site, and Garrett refused to let them move it, so they went back without looking over the material in the vault. Garrett was still waiting on the stockbroker to call with the value of his stocks and bonds when the second appraiser left. So many of the stock certificates were for companies no one had ever heard of. He didn't expect much to come of it, but the broker and his attorney felt as if the research was a good idea. Of course, they knew a few of the certificates were probably good because the companies were still well known. Ford, Union Pacific, and John Deere were three, for example. Even if no other certificates were worth anything, Garrett had enough money to completely pay for the renovations to his building, and some left over should he decide to sell his certificates. Late in the evening the Thursday after the last appraiser left, Garrett received a phone call from his stockbroker. This time the broker seemed somehow different when he began talking. He seemed more solicitous or subservient. Garrett really couldn't put his finger on it, but the whole tone of the call right at the beginning was different. After the pleasantries were out of the way, the broker said, "Garrett, I really don't know where to start this conversation. First, let me say, you are a very wealthy man. Like we expected, some of the stock certificates we took in from you were worthless. The companies had either gone bankrupt or ceased to exist in some other manner. This accounted for nearly half of the certificates. As you remember, many of the stock certificates were issued by companies that are very well known and still in business. The difficult part was accounting for stock splits and even a few reverse splits. One of the certificates had a name change in 1924 and became very well known. There were numerous stock splits and price increases over the years. That certificate alone is worth over $500,000 now. If we can collect everything for you, we will have a little over $1,942,000 to place in your account. Of course, all the bonds were matured, and we are in the process of trying to collect the funds owed. That may take some time because of their age. The stocks, on the other hand, have been placed in your account, and you may sell them at your leisure or continue to hold them. We are still trying to find out what happened to the dividends that would normally have been paid on the dividend-paying stocks. We will keep you informed about our search for those." Garrett sat in total shock. He had no idea what to say or do. He couldn't even fathom that amount of money. Hell, he didn't have to work at all if he didn't want to. Wait, Gramps really hadn't done much work as long as he knew him, but he always seemed to have enough money and then some. Oh, sure. He worked his little 180-acre farm, but that surely hadn't made a large amount of money. Garrett said, "I bet I know where the dividends went. My grandfather passed these certificates to me when he died. He never seemed to work much, but he always had all the money he needed. I suspect we will find he was receiving the dividends from the stocks. His name was Jerome Mans. His address was R1 Box 174, same town as me." Okay, that gives us a place to start. We have a copy of the will and documents needed to prove his and your ownership, so it should be fairly easy to verify. Let me know if I can be of any help at all, Mr. Mans. Good night. Garrett sat on his balcony, staring over the main street of town. The streetlights flickered and came on as darkness fell. All he could think of was the recent conversation with the stockbroker. Hell, he went from not having a place to live to having a large apartment in a neat old building and thought he was on easy street. Now he finds out he literally has millions of dollars and can live in a very nice home if he wants, and probably won't have to work a day in the rest of his life if he doesn't want to. Man, what the hell? Garrett finally became drowsy, and his butt hurt from sitting on the poorly padded deck chair, so he rose and stumbled into his house to go to bed. Even as tired as he was, he had trouble going to sleep. His mind continued to play the what-if game. He spent his millions over and over in his head and tried to decide what to do. Finally, he decided to just keep on doing what he was until he found something he really wanted to do. After all, it worked for Gramps, didn't it? He did decide he was going to make his apartment the most comfortable place to live he could dream up, and he was going to restore the bank to its old glory, then either rent it as an office or use it himself for one. The estimated value of the currency, coins, and bullion finally arrived from both appraisers. The dealer estimated the value of everything to be $970,000, and they offered to purchase the collection outright for $750,000. The auction house estimated the value of the currency and coins to be $900,000 at auction and the bullion to be worth about $300,000. Their sales commission was a flat 18% of the goods should Garrett decide to let them auction off the collection. Garrett didn't need funds immediately, so he decided to let the auction house sell the currency, coins, and bullion. If it sold for the estimated value, he would net about $984,000, which was significantly more than the dealer was offering. He decided to take the gamble. The auction house sent an armored car to pick up the funds. It took nearly a whole day to inventory the collection once again and prepare a receipt for Garrett. During that time, several of the town's residents stopped at the bank trying to see what was going on. When someone ventured too close to the armored car, the guards politely but firmly turned them away. By the time the truck was loaded and gone, rumors were running rampant. When Garrett went into the cafe for his supper, he was almost mobbed with people asking questions about the goings-on. All he would say was, "I found some of great-grandfather's stuff that I needed to ship off for safekeeping. My insurance company required the extra security." Dear listeners, the next part will be out in a few minutes. Meanwhile, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.